Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County. Here is your podcast host, Dwayne Weed.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Discover Montcalm podcast. My name's Dwayne. I'm the host and the producer, and today we're going to start a little segment that I hope to be doing more of over the course of the next coming years, and it's called If This Barn Could Talk. As I drive around Montcalm County, I see all these barns, and what gets in my head is, if that barn could talk, what story would it tell? The family that grew up there, the farmers that used that barn for hay or storage or for their animals. If that barn could talk, what story would it tell? And what it boils down to, it's a family history, is what I'm looking at. So Kirt Wyman here in Howard City, an architect, dabbled in photography and painting. He decided to go out and take pictures of some of the barns and lighthouses throughout Michigan. In this episode, I asked him to kind of scale it back to just the barns in Montcalm County. And this episode's a little longer because he goes into some good detail on each of the barns. For those of you listening, you need to go over to Discover Montcalm podcast on YouTube and check it out there because this episode is very, very visual. Well, Kirk Wyman is going to talk about kind of how he got started, where he's going, and he's going to talk about each of the barns. So let's let Kirk tell his story.
Hi, my name is Kirk Wyman. I'm here today to kind of hopefully promote my interest in some of the unique barns that are in Montcalm County. I fell in love with these years ago when I was growing up, and we'd drive out to my grandfather's cottage out at the lake, and we'd pass all these individual farms, and just the uniqueness and the shapes, the variations and that you would see as you would go. And it came my understanding as I got into the field of architecture, how the shapes derive not only from the old world styles, depending on what location the individual farmers are from, but of their uniqueness that came about as a result of what they were being used for. And you'll see that most of the barns that were single farms like this were set up usually with a basement. That's where they would keep their livestock, and then the upper levels were for their feed storage. They've fallen out of favor in the last 40 years or so because the fact is the small farms are disappearing rather rapidly. The people that have either not wanted to continue that in their families, or they've been purchased by the larger companies that just don't have a use for these type of barns anymore. They're too small for what they need to store. They don't deal with livestock anymore. They're more interested in planting field corn, beets, whatever. So these things are rapidly deteriorating, and you'll find that when we look through a few of these, some of these don't even exist, and these were painted not more than 5 years ago. And the ones that still do exist are even in worse shape than what you'll see here in these pictures.
So it kind of started with you as a younger person. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cedar Springs out towards Pine Lake, which is more of a rural community, and we had cattle farmers on both sides of us. And of course they both had barns, but it was that difficult drive. We would go to see our grandparents each weekend that would introduce us to all.
And where were your grandparents? Where did they
The one in particular lived out towards Lincoln Lake. So we would go down 18 Mile Road past the southern edge, and basically every mile you would go by a barn.
And that kind of got you into architecture, which is what you did your career with. At what point did you start taking pictures of the barns and then turning them into drawings? About what year?
Got interested in watercolors in particular after taking a couple classes at my school, and I found that I enjoyed it, but it wasn't until after I graduated that I figured if I was going to use that medium for anything, it would be to tie it in with my love for old barns. So that would have been early 80s. And I only did that for a few years, and then, of course, full-time work kicked in, and it became a non-existent thing until I had some major operations done, and I needed a physical activity to do that didn't require me to get up and do physical activity. So it made sense just to fall back in with, well, let's try watercolor again. I haven't done it in 40 years. Let's see if I lost my style and flair for it. And I found out that it's still there.
It's still there. Cool. Thank you, Kirk. I'd like to take this opportunity right now to thank our sponsors, West Michigan Technology and Design Solution, your IT and your web hosting specialist. They do all of the hosting that I do for website design for businesses through their hosting platform, and they help us out with our IT work for both DW Video and also the Discover Montcalm podcast. I'd also like to thank Busy Bees for their support with our apparel and our mugs that we have here, and then DW Video, my company at dwvideo.com. We do all the production for this podcast. This particular series that Kirk's been talking about, we got a little bit of who he is, and now we're going to move into a segment where he's going to go through all the barns that he has. Now again, I said this episode's a little long, and you need to watch it on Discover Montcalm podcast on YouTube, because it's stories like this one that I'm working with another family to tell the story of this barn. As we go through this, I'm putting out an invitation. If you're in Montcalm County and you've got a barn on your property, I'd like to hear the story. If this barn could talk, is more of a story of the family, but it's also what that barn's been used for. So, enough of me talking. Let's get back into listening to Kirk, and he's going to go through quite a few barns that he's photographed and he's done his watercolor paintings on, and he's going to describe what each one of them means to him and maybe a little history of each one as he knows it. So back to you, Kirk.
Just find regular barns all over the place, but I try and find something that, does it have a little extra bumps and grinds on it, or in this case, in this particular barn, which is down Kendallville, not too far from our location here, east of Old 131 on the north side, is it actually had two types of roofing system on it, because you had shingle and you had the steel. I like the fact that, even though I don't like the fact that the barn is not being used for anything useful, it had these nice little vines growing up the sides that gave it a little extra flair. Plus this ladder up here in the middle of nowhere caught my eye. And what would they have used that for up there, that high in the barn? And my consensus, knowing some of the farmers, is that they would actually have that hay stacked all the way to the rafters during the fall months. So they would use that to access the top part to fill in the gaps that they still had to get in the extra bales. Obviously, with those huge round ones they have now, they can't use these types of arms anymore. They're too small. The bales are too heavy. It'd go right through the floor. So that's what caught me on that particular barn there. This one, and I've got to think, this one's on M46, and I believe it's between Amble and Northland Drive, but it's on the south side of the road. This is one of the ones I believe that's collapsed in the last couple of years, and you can see that the roof was already starting to fall in down here, and it just kind of continued to peel away till the whole thing went down. But I liked it because, again, it had a interesting looking silo to it. It had the little utility structures off to the side. It was built on the side of a hill that you would go up to drive in, and then obviously the animals would be down below and you would access that from the rear. This next one is still standing. In fact, I drove by it not too long ago, but it's on 22 Mile Road, just north between the expressway and the first road to the east. This one caught my eye because this main entrance here goes all the way through the building. It's like two separate barns when you look at it from the other end, and all I could assume at this point is that maybe one was a work shed versus an actual setup for livestock. But that's kind of what caught my eye on that particular one. This one is north of Trufen. I just drove by this the other week too, so I know it's still standing as well.
And I'll have to say that today is the August 16th?
15th.
Today's August 15th. Yeah, there we go. August 15th, 2023.
All right. Now this one caught my eye again because of it. And it was more on this one was how the building was in relation to the trees. So it wasn't maybe as unique a barn as it's just the overall picture. But the barn does have it's a rather skinny barn, even though it looks wide, it's not. And the silo was so tall and so skinny that it was just a unique structure. But again, it was just something that caught my eye. You got the work area off to the back. It had a little more panache to it than some of the others I've seen. This one, and this is unfortunately, I think, one of the barns that's going to probably be gone in the next few years because it's in pretty rough shape now. But it's down south of Amble. If you take that main road out of town south and take it all the way to the end, you'll see it. And again, it was the color's pretty much gone now. It's pretty much all gray, but it had, again, unique outbuildings around there. The silo was nice. It had the vines growing not only on the silo but on the barn, plus on the old windmill as well. Now the windmill may not be there anymore, so don't look for all if you're planning on taking a trip out there.
Well, the nice thing is about what you've done is you captured it. You know, I see that the painting there says 2018. Now, is that about when you took the picture as well, or is that just when you painted it?
Yeah, most of the ones that you'll be looking at today, the pictures were taken probably within a 6-month time frame of when the pictures were done.
Okay, so if it says 2018, you know, that was the time frame.
2017 was when I finally got full blown into it, and I continued doing that till around 2020. And because I've got a stack of these things now. I believe this is on 46 as well, which is east of Howard City. Again, what caught my eye is the fact that part of the metal roof is gone, the corner is missing, so you can see some of the structural work inside the building, and you can see the cross pieces that they used for nailers and that. And probably one of the other things that you don't see these types of barns built anymore to any great extent is the fact that you just don't have the large wood members available anymore to any great extent. They're extremely expensive. Plus the wood today is very, not necessarily cheap, but they aren't as strong. So you need that much heavier wood to last the way.
And it was
the
interesting
barns have.
when they built these, they never built them airtight.
No,
They always
didn't.
built them so that the air, because they put hay in there, they wanted the hay to dry.
Correct.
So they made sure that there was gaps so that airflow could come through, so that way when they'd go to use the hay for feed, it was dry.
Plus with the lower levels, even though they may have had doors and windows at one time, they still kept them open a lot, especially during the summers, because when the animals would come in to feed or milk or whatever, depending on if it's cows or whatever, the smell could dissipate a little more. So you'll notice like equipment like this wasn't necessarily there. That was more of an embellishment just to give the picture a little more interest.
But I bet you somewhere in history that wasn't too far off.
No, this being, I believe, is probably a manure spreader you would find on every farm that had cows or pigs or sheep or whatever. They would use those to help fertilize their fields. This one is off of Amble Road, and I believe it's Bailey, around the corner north of town and to the east. Now, as you go through, this stump is still there. The tire might not be, the stump is. But I like this one because of the fact that the silos were tucked underneath the roof, and I've never seen that in a barn. So I thought that had to be captured. And I believe this is one of the few barns that are actually still being utilized, if not for livestock, if for storage. That's another reason I like this barn. This one is probably one of the newer ones. I'm guessing it's probably not 20 years old. And it's, if I'm remembering right, it's off of Kendallville, east of, gotta remember, Coral. And it might be Cowden Lake Road or something like that. And it's on the southwest corner of that corner. And it's pretty well buried under trees now, so you gotta really look for it, and you gotta be paying attention. The wheels may still be on the side. I know that window is still there, but being a newer barn, it surprises me how bad its shape it's already in after this was done in 2017. So we're talking 6 years, and it looks like it aged 20 in that time. And it's not because I don't think they use it. I think that it's just not being used well, or it's not being maintained well. This one is on M46, and it's just like 2 miles, maybe a mile past Lakeview. And I like this one because of the uniqueness of the top of the silo here, which was almost octagonal in shaped, and it was all tiled versus metal or your typical semicircle that you usually find there. The barn itself isn't extremely unique, other than some of the block work on the bottom may have been some of that ceramic tile block that they had made early in the 20th century or whatever, but it was more the uniqueness of the silo that caught my attention. And even then, this one was being used for storage at the time, and this was 2016 that I did this one. Is not terrible shape, but you can tell it's not being used like it was, so it's not in great shape anymore. So it's going to last a little longer than some of these that are out there, but again, it's one of those that if you've got interest in seeing some of these old barns, don't wait too long, because 5 to 10 years, at least 50 or 60% of these barns aren't going to be there any longer.
And one thing that I find intriguing as you're changing to the next one is that I'm intrigued as I drive by them with the idea that if this barn could talk, what story would it tell? And you've captured some of the uniquenesses visually from your eye on what story it tells you. So this is really nice. So this one was 2017?
This one was 2017, and if you look at it, it may look familiar because we had just seen it a few pages ago, but this is going to be looking from the north side versus the south side. So this is that barn that's north of Trufen again, which had the tall, skinny silo to it. So you're seeing what the shape was from the opposite end now. So it was one of those that caught my interest enough that I had to do it twice from different angles. This one again is that one that's down south of Coral, but it's a winter scene versus a summer scene, so you can see the windmill as it was back in 2017 with the bare vines growing up it. You got the silos off to the side. You can see some of the utility pieces and parts off to the edge. And again, because of the fact that it's 6 years older now, it's not gonna, it looks bad now.
Everything needs to be maintained.
Yeah, and this one wasn't being maintained when I had these done. And driving by it for 20 years before that, it wasn't being maintained, it wasn't being used. So it's been falling apart for some time. And it's just a matter of time. This is probably one of the first ones that are going to be gone. This one is probably one of the nicer ones that I've seen, and it's on Johnson Road north of Gowan. And I've done this one from several different directions as well, and I like it the fact that it's L-shaped and it's got these unique cupolas over the top that would help, again, the barn breathe to dry that hay out. And then the silo located in the corner, and then it had huge access doors on both sides. So whether they kept livestock on one end and their feed on the other, or that's my guess at this point, because I don't know if this one had a lower level or not. And that's most of the new barns that you'll see out there today don't have lower levels. And they're all used basically. You've got one for livestock, you've got one for grain or straw, and they keep them separate mostly, unless it's a real small farm, which are slowly, well, not even slowly, they're quickly disappearing.
Right.
And most of the farms around here today are corporate owned, or if it is individual owned, it's more than 200 acres now, because they can't survive on 80 anymore.
And this was 2017?
This one was 2017.
Okay.
But the barn is still in pretty good shape. The colors, it's starting to fade a little bit, but it's still in good shape. So I'm thinking, even though they're not using it, I don't believe for livestock anymore, they're using it for storage. This one is probably going to be the most recognizable for the Howard City area, and it's a barn that is on Hazel Street, just east of town. And the thing that I like the most about this, and the farm in particular, you've got, the house would have been over here to the right. It's got this long utility building back in the back. Now, what they use that for, it might have been extra livestock, but it's huge for a small farm like this, and that will probably disappear before the barn does, but the barn is starting to go too. I know that the house was empty 10 years ago, and the whole facility was not being used. Now I think the house is actually either being rented or somebody may be living there. Whether they're using the barn for storage or whatever, I don't know at this time. I haven't been by it in a few months to know for sure how good a shape is. The nice thing about this one is it gave a date as to when it was actually constructed, which was 1899, so the barn is over 125 years.
Yeah. And I think there's one more picture behind that one. I think that one you're going to have to go vertical on it.
Now this one, and this one, unfortunately, you're not going to see. The silo has since disappeared. It's fallen in, but it used to involve the large white house down just south of Kendallville to the east of Old 131. The house is still there. I can't even say the house is in that good a shape anymore. But the barn had been probably gone at least 20 years, and the silo stayed there for a long time, and I thought I'd try and capture it before it officially disappeared. And this was done in 2016, so knowing that it's now gone showed you how fast some of these things are disappearing from what we would come to enjoy if we were living in a rural area or trying to discover the rural area. And now probably the best examples of barns in the area that are still being used for what they were meant to be used for are currently owned by Amish.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, you'll find a lot of those up in Mecosta County or farther to the east in Montcalm. But they are out there if you're looking for them.
You've touched on a little tip of history and the barns that, according to what you've seen. You mentioned earlier that you're now doing things on commission. If somebody sees some of these and they have a barn that they would like you to do or a commissioned building, how does somebody get in touch with you?
And that number is area code 231-937-4984. Or you can get me at my email address. That's S as in Sam, K as in Kirk, Wyman, W-Y-M-A-N, at charter.net.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today and just letting us touch on a piece of history.
Wow. That's a lot of information, and I know this podcast went a little long, but it's the content. And again, you can follow us on Discover Montcalm podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And especially for this episode, you need to check us out on YouTube so that you can see Kirk's drawings, and as he describes each one, you can visualize it right in front of you through the power of video. If this barn could talk, if you have a barn, you know a family, you have a neighbor, I'd love to hear their story about what that barn has been through one generation, multiple generations? Was it built in the 1900s or back in the 1800s? What kind of story does that tell as we dive into a little bit of the history of Montcalm County, but agriculture being such a big part of this county? If this barn could talk, I hope this series kicks off, and you can help me with that by contacting me at 231-250-9624. That's 231-250-9624, and put me in touch with somebody so that we can go out to their barn and we can tell their story. Business people, organizations, communities, reach out to me at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. You can check out all of our episodes. You can also contact me at Duane, D-U-A-N-E, at dwvideo.com. That's Duane at dwvideo.com. Tell me your story idea. Let's see what we can do. It's all about promoting the community and why people should discover Montcalm County. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to buy and shop locally.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Duane at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.